I always stopped the other video, but what I wanted to point out, after you have your pins pulled off, take your thin blade and just run it under the rib to make sure it cleanly comes off. I've got wax paper on here. Some people use clear packing tape, anything like that that the glue doesn't stick to real well. There's our first rib. I'm going to finish up doing the rest of the ribs, and then we'll come back for wing assembly. Thanks. Alright, we're ready to assemble the wing, and for that I have the wing plan printed out on paper, taped down flat to some foam core board, 1/2-inch foam core from Hobby Lobby, and wax paper on top of it. Now I take some basswood. This is 32nd inch thick, 1/2 inch wide. I think I got a big sheet and zipped it down in a bandsaw, but you can get strips like this. And then I've got little scallops cut out for each rib location. These will go outside of the spar, and the spar will pin up against these. And the scallops just keep the glue from gluing the ribs to the spars from getting stuck to this frame. So these basswood strips act as a guide for the build. So we'll go ahead and pin them down right on the line. We don't want to go large on the cord of the wing because the cord is specified in the rules and we don't want to be too big. So we'll pin it down right so it covers half of the line. And the trailing edge piece should go out nearly to the tips. Leading edge piece only has to go to the start of the curve. I think these are 2 foot long pieces, so they're plenty long. Alright, so we've got those pinned in place with scallops at each rib location. And then we'll go ahead and get one of our spars out. And it's going to be long enough at 15.5 inches to overlap past the rib. Looks like about 1 centimeter on each end, so that's plenty long. Those will get trimmed later, so you want to make it equal on both ends. And we're going to put a pin vertically against the spar and pushing it up against the basswood form, and that makes sure your spar stays vertical. And we're going to put that in a number of places along here. Just keep that spar straight, and we'll take a couple of our wood block pins, put them just inboard and hold the spar down to the paper with those. So vertical pins just to hold it up. You could have the blocks on the vertical pins. I find it easier to do each operation separately. So 2 different kind of pins there. Alright, we'll get the other spar out here. And we do have one end of the boron came loose here. We might as well address that right now. I think that was one of those ends that flew off on me. I mean, I went off the end and had to come back. You can put your knife under it and just pop it off to the end. That looks pretty good. You've already got glue on the area. You want to undo anything. What I'm going to do is take my thin 90% acetone, 10% glue, and just put a little bit of it at the end of where it is stuck down because I can see it's not straight. Just run the blade under it until you get to the straight part, and it's pretty easy to lay it back on, just like any boron pop. Typically with this method, you might see at the beginning end something coming up because you had not enough glue when you started running it, or at the end if you weren't careful when you lifted and broke it off. So otherwise it's a very robust way of putting on the boron. So we'll do the same thing here. Get a few pins in to hold it vertical and hold it straight against that guide board. You want to just make sure you don't have a pin at a rib location. I just want to check one other thing on the boron here at the middle. I've got some markings on here, but it looks okay. I wasn't sure if the boron at the middle here got off center, but it looks pretty well centered. So just an optical illusion from the markings that were on the. But if you do find a spot where your boron wiggled off straight, you can use some 10% glue or even some acetone to loosen the joint and get it back centered. If you do have a long whoop-de-doo in the boron because you didn't drive it right down the middle, that's a different story. You're going to have to probably loosen it all the way to the end, because you got to take up that excess boron somehow. Alright, so now I've weighed the ribs, and they weren't registering individually very well on the scale, so I went and weighed all 4 of them together, and we were at 73 milligrams for all 4 ribs. And let's see, the solid ribs are typically in the range of 65. So we're right there on the mass. Now we're going to just lay one in here and check the length. And it looks like our length is long by maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is take the blade in one hand and hold my finger on with the other hand, and now I can roll my finger close to where I'm going to cut it, and as I roll my finger it moves the blade one way or the other, so I can very precisely control how much I'm trimming off there. Okay, and I'm laying it down just because it's easier to work with that way. That looks pretty good. We'll go with that. We'll stand it up when we're ready to glue. We're just going to check each rib at its station. That one's real close. We can trim off a wee bit there. There, I'm cutting through the glue joint a little bit, so it's a little bit tough. Alright, it's better to cut 2 or 3 times than to cut it too short, so be careful with this. That one's actually short by a hair. We'll move that to the end. That one is almost perfect. I'm just going to shave the thinnest slice off the end of it. Alright. Sometimes you want to set your knife blade down near the edge of the table, not in the middle like that, or you're going to fight it. Always do that. So again, guiding with my finger and rolling my finger to move the blade, I can square up the end and trim off the finest little piece. Alright, it's still a little bit tight there. And I put my blade down in the middle. Why didn't somebody say something? Okay, one more sliver off, 1/10 of a millimeter or so. Alright, that looks good. And let's check this rib at the end. And that looks good. Alright, cool. Now, what I like to use, I got some of these 1/2-inch nuts. Just hardware store, 1/2 by 13. It doesn't matter the thread, but that's what they are, 1/2 by 13. Get 2 for each rib. Now we can stand the rib up and put a nut on each side and sandwich the rib between the 2 nuts, and that gets it perfectly vertical. And then you want to push down and get it so the top is flush with the top of the spar. And sometimes it helps if you put another one of these block pins out here. You don't want it real tight, you just want to guide it down. That one, the spar is coming up just a bit. There we go, clamp down nicely. And that end of that boron, which will be trimmed off later, but we don't need it catching on things. So I'm just going to push that down with a little bit of 10% glue. Alright, so that rib's in place, and I like to put all of my ribs in first before I glue. Kind of get into a rhythm with the gluing. Once again, I'm putting a block pin right next to it, but I'm barely pushing down. You don't want to deform the rib. I'm just getting it so the top is approximately flush with the top of the spar. That'll make covering a lot easier. Alright, just popped in place there. That's beautiful. Alright, that one's actually a little low, so I will pull it up a hair. That's good. Again, it's going to cover so much easier if you can get the top of the rib flush with the top of the spar, because the covering goes on the top, and that'll keep you from having a step change in the height of the covering. Alright, that one is coming up just a bit short, which you don't really want. There's a couple things we can do. We can pull the spar in a little bit to give it give it a place for the glue to join it. But the other thing we can do is put a sliver of wood in there. So I'll just get a scrap of indoor grade wood, probably 5 pound or so. And this is probably 13 thousandths, like motor stick wood. Check the fit, and it looks like it fits in there pretty good. So where did I put my, we'll use this blade. This isn't my sharp blade, but don't know where that went. Alright, so we're going to cut a very thin sliver of that extra balsa wood and just put it in there vertically in that joint as a filler. Now we'll add a little bit of 10% glue. I'm using the 10% glue because that'll soak in. That rib is down a little. So just jack it up a little. And it's stuck there, so we're good. This side's good. This side's a little bit high. There we go. And if you see it's not quite touching or not as tight, you can pull in the spar a little bit by putting the pin right outside the rib in the semicircular cutout there, and that'll tighten things up, make a better joint. If it's too much to move it, then you need to look at putting on a piece of spacer wood. I don't see, here's my tweezers. I'm going to push down on this rib just a little bit. That one tends to be ballooning up, so I'm going to loosen the nuts just a little and then push down. See if I can get control of it now. So we'll put another balsa block on there. Perfect. Alright, a little bit of 10% glue. This one's pushed down too far by the balsa block. Good. Alright, now especially on the compression ribs, you want to make sure those joints don't come apart. I'm going to put a little dot of 50-50 glue on there. So the 10% glue soaks in, 50-50 completes the joint. We'll fill the little nooks and crannies just a little bit, but don't get carried away with it. You just want the minimum to hold it. And a lot of times the 10%, if you got a really good joint, the 10% is going to be enough. And that one looks just a hair loose, and we're just going to squeeze in a little with an extra pin there. Alright, cool. We've got the ribs on. Now you're going to want to do the tips. And on the tips, we're going to start with the curved portion. So, where did I put that? Here we go. We got this out of the microwave. It ran for 10 minutes at level 2. Your microwave may vary, so make sure, especially if you have a 3D printed form, make sure you understand what level on the microwave you can stand without melting your plastic. Alright, So we've got two curved pieces. We're going to split them apart here. And we'll put one at each end. Now you're going to find where it fits the curve nicely. And then you're going to go inside the spar at the leading edge. And you're going to go all the way till it contacts the rib. And you're going to put a dot of glue there. Now, these joints will have to move later when you go to put in the tip dihedral. So you don't want a lot of glue in this joint. It will make your job a lot harder later. So we're just going to put one dot of glue right where the outline, the tip outline meets the rib. We don't want to glue that whole length, just one little dab where it meets the rib, gluing it to the leading edge spar. Then we're going to go ahead and pin this down on the curved line. And by pinning down, I mean with the balsa block pins, and it can extend past the trailing edge. There, perfect. So we'll leave that alone for a second. We'll do this one. And sometimes it's easier just to come in here and put the dab of glue on the end of the outside of the circle, on the end of the tip leading edge. That way we don't get too much glue in there. Put a pin to press it against the leading edge spar, and that clamps it in there. And now we'll place a few pins to both hold it down and get it to the proper shape. As long as the wet form got it close to the right shape, and that's why we overform it, we'll be okay. There's nothing super magical about that shape. You don't want it bowing out on the outer edge of the tip, because the span is going to be an issue too. Of course, we're going to adjust the dihedral right to the legal limit of the span. Alright, so we've got that all pinned down. The only thing left is the trailing edge of the tips. This also is 32 thousandths thick balsa, tapered from 50 to 40, I believe. 55 to 40. So the 55, the fat end, goes in at the root, and the skinny end goes out at the tip. And you're gonna cut this one. Well, you could cut either. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the one that's already in there. Put this against your basswood piece so it's in the right place. And I'll go ahead and cut this new tip. I mean the trailing edge of the tip. So we cut it so it'll drop right inside the balsa we already put down. We got that one cut. Look for the fat end on this one. Put it in against the rib. And cut it right up against the curved tip. Alrighty. Now, same as we did with the leading edge, we're going to take and put just a drop of glue on the rear surface at the end, the inner end of this, and that'll glue it to the spar. We don't want to glue the whole length where it's touching the spar. We just want a little glue, enough to hold it in place while we're finishing the assembly and covering. And that's going inside the rear spar. And a couple of pins to make sure we get a good joint out here. This is one of those joints that if you don't do it right, it's going to break. So this, you want a good joint. You're not going to be loosening this later. This is the trailing edge of the tip joining to the curved part of the tip. So we put a little bit of 10% glue and then a dab of 50-50. And again, the covering will be on the top. So if they're not exactly flush at the top, raise or lower them until they are flush. Same thing here. I'm going to put a dab of 50-50 on the back edge of the tip. Put it right in the pocket against the spar and against the rib. Put a pin to clamp that joint so we get a good glue joint there. I think it's time for a new board. Too many pinholes in here. Probably built a number of wings on this between all the kids I've had building. Okay, and set up this tip joint. Again, making sure we get everything lined up flush, a good joint, and then some 10%. That'll soak into the joint, and if you want, you can risk it at that. I like to put a little tiny drop of 50-50 there. Alright, so the wing is framed up. We're ready for covering. We'll stop there and let it dry for about an hour, just to make sure we don't spring something free. Then to remove this, we're going to remove all the pins, but try not to move the basswood pieces out of the way yet. Remove the pins and then start working along it with a blade and make sure you get under each of these rib to spar joints and make sure it's not stuck to the wax paper, because if you try and lift it, you might break something. But just take your time lifting it off, get all the pins off, but don't pull the basswood. With these cutouts in the basswood, it should not be stuck anywhere. It's possible it'll stick out at the tip. I don't have a cutout out there. We can go ahead and move if you're going to move the board, I would move these nuts away from the rib, just so you're not loading up the rib if you bump into something. Move the board to a safe location. And we're ready to cover. So we're going to call that the end of this segment of the video. We will come back and do the covering on the wing at a later